It's great to welcome back to the program Rachel Bitecofer, who's an election forecaster and analyst, host of the podcast The Election Whisperer, founder of Strike PAC, and I think, Rachel, someone who is increasingly concerned about what 2022 is looking like for Democrats. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a trained political scientist like I am, and your area of expertise happens to be campaigns and elections, voter behavior, there's few trends in that kind of research that is as adamant, as robust, as continuous as the midterm effect. So, even before, I mean, literally as Biden was walking across the stage and getting inaugurated, the fundamentals of this cycle are against the Democrats. So, given what happened in 2020, not only were they structurally had this huge fundamentals advantage, but then the events of 2020 could not have set up a challenger trying to oust an incumbent better than Joe Biden in that fight.
Right.
Seeing the Democrats unable to capitalize on that down ballot, and not just because it's something that happens, right? Like, it's something you have to make the conditions for, and they did not do that, right? We have a lot of problems in the way our system infrastructure for electioneering is, all the way from organizational to tactics to strategy, that make it distinct from the Republican universe. And so those two things combined should have everybody concerned.
So let's start with like the top level and then work to the specifics of this next election. There's this general idea that you have the control of the White House switch in one election, and then in that next midterm, the party that takes control of the House, that takes control of the White House doesn't do well in the House, often losing. Now, it doesn't always happen, but it happens frequently. What is there on top of that structural thing that may be specific to the current slate of Democrats and Republicans that concerns you for 22?
Yeah, I mean, here, let me just say, in terms of what you just said about, it doesn't always happen, but it happens frequently. Let me be very, very clear. The last 40 midterm cycles, in 38 of them,
Right,
the incumbent party suffered midterm loss. In the polarized era, which is if you think about soil periods or anthropology or something like that, we're living in a very distinct behavior pattern time period of hyperpartisanship and polarization. In that era, we have seen these large midterm effects. Not that we've never seen large ones in history, but we're seeing them kind of become the staple. And of course, that is because we have this very, very distinct, two-party coalition setup right now. We didn't always have these two parties. It took a long time for them to institutionalize. And now they have these very institutionalized voting banks that are ideologically homogenous, that are, at least especially in the Republican format, very demographically homogenous. And therefore, you don't have like a midterm swing because people are like, I've tried Coke, and I'm like, maybe I'll try Pepsi, right? That's not so much of what's happening. There is always some voters moving choice, who are going from Coke to Pepsi. But what's really powering these large midterms is that the demographic composition of the electorate is switching. A lot of that switch, by the way, David, isn't coming from the right, okay? It comes from us participating and then pulling back, right? That's what I'm trying to head off.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. A couple weeks ago, I said, we had a situation like you're pointing out. 2020 was just ripe for Joe Biden to oust an incumbent. Everything went wrong under Trump. And then on top of that, you had this disastrous pandemic response. And still, while the popular vote margin was big, it came down to relatively few 100,000 votes in a few states, the same way that it did in 2016. 2016 could have gone Hillary, 2020 could have gone Trump.
Right.
I imagine that with a Democrat in the White House, maybe now this is more a 24 conversation than 22, I don't think that Democrats will be as motivated to reelect Joe Biden, or if it's Kamala Harris and Biden goes one term. And so I worry that Republicans will be reinvigorated by saying, let's get Trump back in. And that's a real concern to me. Is that concern warranted in your mind?
That should make you guys all stay up at night like it does me. I mean, here I am days out from a appendectomy, and I'm doing the show today because it's so urgent that I tell as many people as possible and turn as many people as possible onto it, the solution. Because it's not like, okay, we have this problem, and you're getting a lot of oxygen about that in the media, but the solution is as equally, I mean, it's more important, right? And the solution, of course, if we can implement it here, isn't so much, it isn't just about having the policy power. It is about staving off potentially democratic collapse. So, it's just so critical that people understand on that other side, they think they're the good guys.
Yeah.
Okay. They think we're the bad guys because they're fed all of this hyper partisan, red meat. It's constant crisis and threat, right? And so what the things that they're doing over there to dismantle democracy, they would tell you are in defense of it. And they believe that. And we all know objectively that that's not true. And if we get confused, we can look at international audiences to find out, are we doing groupthink or are we actually right? And it's absolutely the case that they are going to be on fire to put Donald Trump back in that White House. They are going to be on fire to flip Congress, as we were when we felt the threat of their in-party power.
Right.
And, the Democrats' hope is that, if Biden's relatively personally popular, if we do a couple of these big packages, things will just be fine. And that's, that was not an unreasonable hope in 1990. Or maybe even in the early 2000s, but not now, because we have a distinct behavior in the electorate, as you just pointed out, as shit show as Donald Trump's term in office was, everything on hyper drive, but also different too, because it wasn't abstract stuff that we care about. It was pandemic is coming to kill you, your family, take all your stuff, kill your personal wealth, everything, right? And if you still end up with the same contest I told you would end up with 16 months before the election, almost to the letter, I said, this is exactly how 2020 will play out, that means something's really wrong with your political system. Because when a giant stimulus comes in like that, there should be reaction, right? Like the thing that we should have seen in a healthy, if politics didn't need to change from the 80s and the 90s, then we wouldn't have seen a repeat of 2016 and not a 1980 Reagan-Carter shellacking, right?
Hey, now along those lines, I mean, when you talk about policy and all these different things, the Republican Party is not really a party of policy anymore. It's communism and socialism are going to take over. Mitch McConnell is great because he stops Democrats from doing things, critical race theory, etc. So how do you run against that? How do you run what do Democrats need to do?
Right. That's the frustrating part is it's really easy to run against that, but not if you're tinkering in the limbs of the tree, okay? Like their system is built like that. Like they've built, and Michael Steele was, him and I are like tandem. He was on TV last night on Brian Williams' show, trying to explain to people, look, this is we go in there and we just decimate your brand. Like the reason they don't need policy or achievements, and I tweeted about this last night, is that it's not to the electorate that sees their shit. It's not even about here's A or B. It's about B sucks so much that it is going to come and is going to drink the blood of your children, right? I mean, that's the shit they're getting over there, right? So, like, what Strike PAC is, I mean, it's many things. It's a strategic revolution. It's a tactical deployment revolution. But it's also, I mean, most critically, it's a messaging revolution because it takes the whole thing away from this, should we mobilize the base or persuade independence? Because it doesn't matter what the answer is, A or B, because that's not the world we live in right now. And it readjusts the whole thing from the root up to a branding war, right? And when you're in that posture, you want to be putting them on defense. And the way to do that isn't to defend yourself against CRT and defend the police and all this shit. It doesn't matter if we could disappear everybody that ever held that position. They would still brand every candidate from the moderate, all the way down as a defund the police socialist. That's what they'll do to Val Demings. We already know what they're going to do, right? So, like, you can't escape that label. What you can do is go on an offense with them and make them own. And the nice thing is you don't have to distort shit. Like, no Democrat wants to defund the police, but now the whole party's ascribed to this position.
Yeah.
On the Republican side, the things that we're attacking them for are things they're doing. They're the real things that everybody supports, that are, the party's congressional leadership are doing. And, you don't even have to get hyperbolic, even though it sounds hyperbolic. It's just the facts, right? And so you make it so that the electorate has to choose. In South Florida, okay, socialism, right? Ooh, boy, don't give me a $300 child care tax credit, or military coup, right? You pick South Florida, because I can tell you this, down in South Florida, those populations are afraid of socialism.
Yeah.
They're the South America. But you know what else they're afraid of? Right-wing military coups. Because if you look at South American history and what has destabilized South America just as much is like the Republican Party has cooking right now in the lab.
Yeah, I mean, I think the complexity in South Florida, I was just down there, is Cuban Americans don't care about, right-wing military involvement. They like it,
Right.
and they want it to go into Cuba. Being from Argentina myself,
That's
and
right.
having a sense of the different groups there, that's complex. Let me ask you this. Intuitively, it seems to me that a lot of Trump's 24 potential is based on whether he can successfully play kingmaker in 22, whether Marjorie Taylor Greene gets reelected, whether Lauren Boebert gets reelected, et cetera. Is that an accurate assessment, or does that not really matter?
No, I mean, partially, David, because Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert are, that's the thing, is like, it's so hard to have this encyclopedic knowledge of the apparatus of how elections actually work. And all that matters in a race is, what percent of Republican voters and their indie leaners are going to be voting in that electorate versus the other side. So when you look at a district like Boebert's, or especially Green's, they're not ever getting tossed out of that seat, right? Those districts are not drawn in a competitive way.
Even from a Republican challenge, you think that they're good for as long as they want those seats?
Oh yeah, they're never going to beat back. I mean, you're not going to go No, even after the Holocaust, the horrible offensive stuff with the vaccine patches.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's like trying to go primary AOC on our side. And I know guys, as soon as I say that, oh, they're not the same, then they're not, and they're nothing alike, okay?
Yeah.
But the one way that they are alike is that they serve in districts that are not drawn to be competitive between the parties, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they have these distinctly ideological electorates that they satisfy, so the question is this: the answer to your question is this: okay, you're not going to be those two, and so you don't want to turn them into symbolic, measurements. But it is true that if we can we beat back the midterm fundamentals here, and we keep Donald Trump from being even in contention to become Speaker of the House, because that's the plan, guys. Speaker of the House doesn't have to come. It's never been true that they've been so rude to their own membership that they would go recruit an outsider to be Speaker.
Yeah.
But the rules are there, and if McCarthy thinks for one second that Donald Trump doesn't have his eye on that speakership, especially since he's banished out in basically that Superman world where they put the villains out in space and they're rotating out in that space. That's where Trump is. His only point to come back into the public debate every day and in a way that they have to cover him, they don't have a choice, is that speakership. Okay, because otherwise he's going to stay over, at least to some degree. The media is aware of how they're culpable in his rise and his tenure, right? So they're not going to just open the door to him. But if he breaks it down, right? So you really, everything, they have the physical power, the legal power to not certify elections if they take control in 2022.
Right.
I don't know how anybody watching this party could come to any other conclusion than that their goal is to fight 24, do their best to win it, and then if they don't win it anyway. Right?
Yeah, as we've seen them claim from 2 a.m. on November of 2020. That also it's crazy to call it a strategy, but it's a tactic, at least. I guess we could say.
For them, no, it's not crazy to call it a strategy, okay? Because this is something that got articulated, as did the election narrative that Trump, the media, Trump's big lie. It was the whole Republican Party's big lie. And they began to seed its antecedents months before November of 2020. And they put all of this legwork in place that so that they could get tight margins in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, that they
Right.
were preventing those ballots from arriving and getting counted until election night ballots came, which were anticipated to disproportionately break for Trump. So that they were creating strategically a situation on election night where Trump would be ahead in the vote count. The other ballots have been blocked, at least from that initial night of coverage,
Right.
and then they could contest in court. Now, it ended up a wrinkle in that plan because the margins were large, just large enough in Wisconsin and large enough in PA and Wisconsin and Michigan to make that really hard. And still, what did they do? They went for it, right? Never make any single mistake. As hot messes they are over there, the thing that they are looping us on is strategic planning and implementation of those plans. I call us walking dead zombies. We're kind of stumbling along until the next human sets off human activity, and then we're like, oh, we should go deal with that, right? They're over there like velociraptors. They're
Yeah.
planning shit, and they're executing it on. And now we can't afford to be aimless. And so really that strategic overhaul. I mean, we're better on issues. We're better on policy and all the wonky shit. But guys, like the environment that we're in, the one thing we're not better on is strategy and war making, and we damn well better fix it quick.
Yeah, a point I made earlier on today's podcast. Rachel Bitecofer, election forecaster, analyst, host of the Election Whisperer podcast, and also the founder of Strike PAC. Rachel, always a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, and I urge everybody, go to Strike PAC's website, see what these messaging that's offensive branding messaging looks like, and if you can, support us.